Your English lesson today on reading analysis for English GCSE. Today's lesson is an introduction really to the first time that you're going to have to use reading analysis in your work, and that is for paper 1 question 2. We know that a lot of these skills are assessed throughout both of your GCSE papers, but this is the first time that you'll have to tackle it. Today we're going to look at helping you choose the very best evidence. By evidence, I just mean quotes. How do you pick which ones that you're going to be able to write about in depth? How to write a response without relying on PEE or that very kind of strict modelled writing that you may have started doing at school. We say PEE as in point evidence explain because it's the most common model. You may have been shown PEL or PEZ or many other versions, but we want to start moving away from that now. And I'm going to show you what might move a response from attempt into clear. So attempt is level 2 writing, and we'll get you kind of less than half the marks in an exam. We want to try and be moving to clear analysis where you'll be picking up more than half the marks for each of the questions. All you need for this lesson is ideally the extract. Now that is attached onto this assignment on Google Classroom, or if you're watching on YouTube, it is available to download in the description below this video. You also need a pen and ideally a highlighter, but that's not essential. But to start us off, you can see on the screen some photos or stills from movies from the last few decades. All of these movies come from books. Now I'm going to ask you to pause your screen now as you have a quick look and see how many of these you can identify. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look over those and you recognise some, if not all, if you're a film buff or a big book reader, maybe. Okay, the first one is The Green Mile. So this is a film that stars Tom Hanks and it tells the story of John Coffey. He's a man who's on death row for murder. This is what we might call a magic realism story in that it's set in a world that we recognise as our own, but there are some supernatural elements. It is a great film. If you haven't already seen it, I would highly recommend it, but I bet you're crying by the end. The next one is also a prison-based story, The Shawshank Redemption, also about a man who is sent to prison for a crime he didn't commit and tries very hard to escape. Now, this isn't actually from a novel. This is from what we call a novella, which is a shorter version, somewhere between a short story and a full-length novel. And if you're trying to get into reading or trying to get back into reading, the novella is a really good option because it's shorter and less commitment than a full novel, but still enough development and something to get stuck into. Now, the next one is also from a novella. The film is called Stand By Me, but the novella is called The Body, and it's about 4 friends who find a body in the woods. It's a coming-of-age story about friendship, and it's a really great film and a great book as well. Onto the bottom row, a lot of you will recognise this as very, very famous, copied scene from The Shining, where Jack Nicholson bursts through a door with an axe and says, "Here's Johnny." We're looking at an extract from The Shining today, but not this scene. Finally, you might recognise Pennywise the Clown from It. Now you need to, if you're going to be brave, if you're going to try the book for It, because it comes in over 1,000 pages, but it's a really good read. So what have all these got in common? Well, they're all written by the same author, a man called Stephen King, who's one of the most prolific, by prolific, I mean he writes a lot, authors in the last 50 years. You're unlikely to find Stephen King on your exam paper, and that's because he's probably considered a little bit too popular to be included. But his writing is very accessible for readers of all levels and often very descriptive, so it suits our purposes to use an extract today. So first of all, let's look at the question. Now, the great news, and there is great news in GCSE English, is that the wording never changes on the exam paper, so the questions are largely predictable. And this question, paper 1, question 2, always begins, how does the writer use language? Now, it can address different aspects of your text. It might focus on how the writer uses language to describe the setting or an event, and quite often a character or a character's mood. And that's what we've got here, How does the writer use language to convey Danny's feelings? So you may have the extract in front of you, and we'll read that in a moment. But just for some context, Danny is the central figure of The Shining, and he's a young boy. A hotel called the Overlook with his parents because his dad is going to be the caretaker there over the winter season when it is closed. But the Overlook has a very sketchy history, and Danny himself has a special gift in that he can see and hear dead people. So it is a horror film. I will say The Shining is the scariest book I have ever read, and I would highly recommend it. But back to the question. You will get bullet points underneath in the exam, like this. And again, they will be worded exactly like this. And they will say you could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. We're not going to talk about sentence forms today, only because the examiners do suggest that you avoid that one unless you see something specific you can talk about. Now, there are examples of sentence forms in here you might want to write about, but I would rather that we focused on the more valuable bullet points and things that you will probably be able to get more out of, which are words and phrases and language features and techniques. But first of all, words and phrases. This is by far the most important, and you can get all the marks that you need in this just for focusing on this first bullet point. The reason that words and phrases are so important is because that gives you the best option to really demonstrate understanding of language to the examiner. But what does words and phrases mean? Let's look at a couple of avenues you could explore with this. Okay, what can you say about words and phrases? Well, broadly speaking, it's split into two different camps. The first thing you can talk about is imagery. So, especially with paper one, which is a fiction text where a writer has created a world or created a story, all this kind of writing is designed to put pictures in the reader's head. So as you're reading, think about the images that crop up for you and how these images and pictures are linked to the question. Now, I am aware that for some people, imagery doesn't really work. Not everybody's brain is wired in such a way to create these images and create these pictures as you read. And that is absolutely fine if that's something that you find very difficult. You could, and indeed any reader can, also look at connotations. So when you choose an interesting word or phrase, think about what it actually means, but also what does it remind you of? Is it linked to anything else? And can those links be used to reflect what you're being asked to write about? So is it linked to the question in any way? We're going to read the extract now. And whilst I do this, I suggest you listen out for words or phrases that kind of stick out to you. Now go with your gut on this. The extracts are chosen carefully because they're loaded with words and phrases and things that you can write about, and you will be drawn to something that you can say something about, I'm sure. Feel free to highlight as I go through. It says, his breath stopped in a gasp. An almost drowsy terror stole through his veins. Yes, there was something in here with him, some awful thing the Overlook had saved for just such a chance as this. Maybe a huge spider that had burrowed down under the dead leaves, or a rat, or maybe the corpse of some little kid that had died here on the playground. Had that ever happened? At the far end of the concrete ring, Danny heard the stealthy crackle of dead leaves as something came for him on its hands and knees. Okay. Now, I have noticed a punctuation error there. I apologise. Just at the end of ring, that should be a comma. I'll make sure that's changed in the document that you download. But for now, what I'd like you to do is pause the video here, just while you have a little look through the extracts and highlight some of those words and phrases that you think you could say something about, that tell you something about Danny's feelings at this time. Try and choose 2 good bits of evidence. Okay, we go back to the question now. And we can start looking at language features and techniques. Now, there's a reason I don't start you looking for language features and techniques. There is something called feature spotting, which I think is the way that a lot of us learn about language analysis. But examiners have warned against people just looking for language features, trying to search out those similes or look for that alliteration. And that's because you get very little credit just for finding the method. All your marks here are in the quality of the comment you make about it, and words and phrases allow you to do that much more easily. However, there is credit for naming language features and techniques, just limited, and it may be, you may find that the words and phrases that you've already highlighted do contain some of these language features and techniques. So it is useful practice to see what's there. Now, there are lots and lots of techniques here, but here are some that I found. A rule of 3. So this is a list of 3 things, and they're often used to emphasize a certain mood or a certain feeling. Repetition, the same word or phrase repeated, again for emphasis. Now this can be next to each other in the text, or if you find the same word or phrase repeated throughout a text, perhaps when you're approaching another question, you could refer to that as a structural point. But here we're talking about language, so it's next to each other. Onomatopoeia, which I'm just slightly covering up there, I can see. So onomatopoeia is that really long, complicated word that you don't need to know how to spell, but that sounds like the noise it is describing. We often use that to create action. So think of it as an addition to imagery. It's the sounds that go with the pictures. Finally, personification, where a thing is given human qualities or human emotions or human intentions. That's often used to create tension in a piece, because when a character is nervous or scared or becoming quite paranoid, they might look around and see threat everywhere. So it's a great device for that in this kind of writing. Now, by no means are these the only techniques in this paragraph. There are absolutely loads, and I'm quite sure that you may spot some others. But for now, please, I'd like you to pause the video and just annotate on your script where you can see examples of these 4 techniques. Okay, let's see what you found. There we go, the rule of 3, the green right in the middle there. Maybe a huge spider that had burrowed down under the dead leaves, or a rat, or maybe the corpse of some little kid that had died here on the playground. Some very rich imagery there, but definitely a list of 3. Next, repetition. Yes, yes. Remember I said we weren't going to talk about sentence forms, but there's definitely something here you could talk about. These short sentences that might match the heartbeat of somebody who is feeling increasingly scared. Onomatopoeia, crackle, the crackle of the dead leaves. Now notice here that I've highlighted the word stealthy as well, because this makes it a phrase rather than a word, and stealthy is an interesting adverb there, or adjective rather. This stealthy crackle. Stealthy means quiet and creeping up. So this isn't a loud noise. This has to be quite a quiet environment for the character to hear this. Finally, personification. Some awful thing the Overlook had saved for just such a chance as this. Remember, the Overlook is the name of the hotel. A hotel can't save something up for a chance to scare a small child. But why have we personified the hotel here? Is it to suggest that it may be possessed by some kind of evil spirit? You may also argue that this one down here is personification as well, because stealthy suggests that there's something deliberate about the noise. But yes, there's other things there. You may well have spotted that rhetorical question, or sort of words that are linked throughout a theme. There's lots and lots to talk about, and those are just some of the things you could use. So here's our example answer. So this student, in response to the question, how does the writer use language to convey Danny's feelings? Convey, by the way, just means communicate, and it's a very popular word for AQA to use in their questions. They seem to like it quite a lot. Okay, this student has written, The writer describes Danny imagining a huge spider, a rat, or maybe the corpse of some little kid as the threat in the playground. This rule of three is effective because these are all common fears which may be shared by the reader, showing that Danny is scared. This imagery suggests Danny's fears may be limited to obvious scary things because he is just a little kid. Okay, so what you might notice here is there's no point for a point evidence to explain. The student's gone straight in with a quote and then they're talking about the quote. And that really is the best response here, because not only does it save you time, but a lot of people, when restricting themselves to PEE, find they just repeat the point in the explanation anyway. So go in with your quote. But there's a lot of things here that the student has done well. They've embedded their quote, and that's something that is really worth practicing. This idea that you put your quote into your sentence, into your analysis. So we've got Danny imagining a huge spider. They've also truncated their quote. Truncated just means shortened. So you can see that rather than writing out a huge big quote when there's lots of stuff you want to use, you can just pick out the bits that you need, really. So we've got here the things from the list of three: the huge spider, a rat, or the corpse of some little kid. You may also have been shown that you can write the first bit of the quote with an ellipsis, ... and then the end. That's perfectly fine as well. We've got reference to terminology here. We've got rule of three. We've got a reference to imagery. So it's ticking all the boxes on that score. But remember, the value is in the explanation. And what we've got here is the notion that Danny's scared and some reference to the effect on the reader. It's not bad. It's probably what an examiner would call an attempt. They've had a go here. However, the point isn't quite developed enough to gain the higher marks. So this is going to get you 3, maybe 4 out of 8. To move it up into the higher category, you need to add a little bit more. And here we have the increase in size and severity from a simple spider to a dead body reflects Danny's growing fear as his imagination takes hold and he begins to panic. Okay, another typo there. I do apologise, that should be in size. But what we've done here is gone back into the quote and said something else. And that's true, isn't it? He starts off scared of a spider, which you would see in a playground, but as his imagination takes control and the paranoia grabs hold of him, he gets carried away and he's thinking, oh, maybe it's a rat or maybe it's a dead body. So that reflects that kind of growing fear. And that there, as an additional comment on the quote, would move this analysis into clear. It's linked to Danny's feelings, it extends it, and crucially, it's saying more about a little. And that's really the key to developing your answers, is to say as much as you can about the quote. Go back in, is there anything else that can be developed upon? So now it's over to you. You can access these slides on your Google Classroom, and I'd like you please to submit your responses to the assignment by the date suggested. And you can use Google Forms for that, and I will assess the work alongside the criteria for paper 1 question 2. So I will give you a mark out of 8 for this. That's all you need to do. So you're more than welcome to stop watching now. But I do have something extra for those of you who want a little bit of a challenge towards the end. But if you're leaving now, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Are you still here? If you are, I want you to just take another look at the very, very last line of this extract. Now, to me, this line is the scariest line of all. It says, as something came for him on its hands and knees. Gives me a shudder. Why do you think that I believe this to be the scariest line in the whole piece? What makes that final phrase so frightening? I want you to think of the imagery that's created, or perhaps the connotations of some of the words there. Add your thoughts onto the bottom of your assignment, and I'd be really interested to see what you come up with. If you're watching this on YouTube, why not pop something in the comments down below, and I'll let you know if you're on the same lines as me. Okay, thank you very much. I'll see you next time.